Okay, let's talk proteins. This is everybody's favorite macromolecule. They're also quite complex. So proteins are one of the most diverse of all the biomolecules. And they are used in so many different ways. Look at this picture right here. So they are just like these little chains, and then the chains can form into curlicues. That's what we call our secondary structure. So they're linear when they're primary, they're a sheet when they are secondary. Then we have tertiary, and then finally we have quaternary. Quaternary, it has a funny name. It's called globular because they look like a little globe. They're globular. And our favorite kind of protein is the enzyme. I'll tell you why in a little bit, but proteins are globular, or enzymes are globular proteins. Now, here's the really cool thing about proteins. Proteins are constantly being recycled by your body. And so they're kind of like those Legos. So you consume some protein, your body breaks it down, but they really don't break down the amino acids, which are the monomer. They keep those intact, and then they just reuse them to build different things, just like the Legos. You don't destroy the Legos when you're playing with them. So they have so many functions, and we have this acronym to help you remember. And look at the first letter of the 5 things right there on your paper. CHEST, chest. And that helps you remember the 5 things that they do. So if you want to underline the CHEST to help you remember that, go for it. Now, there's a lot of text on these slides. That's to kind of help me talk and then you guys to follow, but you don't have to write down everything. In fact, I might just try to highlight as I'm going over the things that I would recommend you write down. So the first type that we're going to talk about are contractile proteins. These are your muscle contractions. So these deal with muscle, oh gosh, I'm terrible at highlighting. Muscle contractions and movements. So when you want to, flex your bicep, that's your contractile proteins at work. The next one is hormones. And I told you there's some hormones that are made of lipids and a lot of hormones that are made of proteins. And probably the most important one is insulin. So I would write down that the example is insulin. Insulin helps your body get your glucose out of food. If your body doesn't make insulin, do you know what the problem is? If you said diabetes, you are correct. So they have to have synthetic or man-made insulin to help them be able to break down the glucose from their food. If you remember one thing in our class, it is that enzymes are proteins. And the enzyme's job is to control how chemical reactions happen in our body. And we have all sorts of chemical reactions, like thousands upon thousands of chemical reactions in our body. And each chemical reaction has at least one enzyme, maybe even more. One of our favorite ones to talk about is lactase. Lactase is an enzyme that breaks down lactose, which is the sugar in milk. So if you've ever heard of people who are lactose intolerant, their body doesn't produce lactase. Ooh, I'm highlighting it the wrong part. Notice that this ends in ACE. A lot of our enzymes, not all of them, but a lot of them end in ASE. A lot of our sugars end in OSE, OSE. So the lactase breaks down lactose. And you can see our OSE on our milk sugar over here. Lactose. Just like glucose, sucrose, fructose. We've talked about all of those. So more functions of proteins. They can be structural. What I mean by structural is they help our body keep its structure, or any living thing, a cell, keep its structure. So they form bones and muscles. They form our ligaments. They form our blood vessels. They form our skin, keratin in our fingernails. Almost all of us, all the parts of us are made up of proteins. And then last part, the T stands for transports. And we will talk about these proteins that are embedded in the cell membrane that help things get in and out of cells. Another transport protein that you might know and love is hemoglobin, which is part of the red blood cell, and its job is to carry oxygen all over the body. So it's a transport protein. It's carrying oxygen. All right, so it says examples of proteins. If you want to go back and put any of those examples that you put, whether it's insulin, whether it is muscles, whether it is hemoglobin in the blood, any of those you can put as your examples. Okay, I told you, if you remember one thing in this class, that enzymes are proteins. If you only remember two things in this class, it's that the monomer proteins are amino acids. Remember it backwards, forwards, upside down, sideways, every which way. Proteins are made of amino acids. Amino acids join together to make proteins. All of that good stuff. So a couple of interesting things. So you have this right in front of you. So it says the monomer is the amino acid. Make sure you've got that highlighted. The polymer is a protein, and sometimes it's called a polypeptide, and that's important for you to know as well. The protein and polypeptide just mean the exact same thing. Now, why is it called a polypeptide, you might ask? So up here at the top, we have these circles. The circles usually represent amino acids, and I'm going to try to make two little A's right here. Amino acid. And so we draw amino acids as a circle. And look at all these circles. They're joined together by bonds, of course, because that's how atoms come together. And these bonds are special. They're called peptide bonds. We only find them in proteins. So how many peptide bonds are there in this picture? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 peptide bonds. So there's many peptide bonds. So it is a poly, meaning many, peptide. It's a molecule made with many peptide bonds. All right, lastly, our body typically doesn't want to break down our own proteins. If you are to eat proteins, you get 4 calories per gram. So if you ate 100 grams of steak, you would get 400 calories. Steak's pretty much all protein, maybe a little bit of lipid. But our proteins are so essential to our lives, our blood vessels, our muscles, our bones, our hemoglobin. Our body doesn't want to break them down. That is in the last resort if you're starving. So if you've ever seen pictures of people that are in a starving situation, whether it's from concentration camps or something like that, they have very little muscle on them because their body is having to break it down. But that's because they're in a dire situation. All right, now I want you to pause this and go do 19, 20, 21, and 22 on the back of the Amoeba Sister sheet.